Well, a very warm welcome to our next session under the title of The Rise of the Machines, Robots in a Post-Pandemic World. Over the last few months, the pandemic has led to a growing concern on technology's impact on the future of work, as this could accelerate the perceived rise of the robots and pose a threat to employment. Given that most factory floors had significantly shut down, we witnessed a spike in automation and the introduction of new business models, meaning that some of the jobs lost during the crisis may never return. We are, however, still a while away from revamping factories to adopt full automation. Well, to talk about the way forward for the workforce, we have a really fantastic lineup for you. Suzanne Bieller is our first guest for this session, who is the General Secretary of the International Federation of Robotics Germany, which acts as the voice of the global robotics industry. In 2019, Suzanne was elected among the 30 women in robotics that you need to know about, and among the top 10 women in the robotics industry in 2020. Suzanne is highly involved in current advocacy topics in robotics around ethical, legal, societal and economic aspects of robotics and AI, and has in-depth knowledge of the global market and current tech trends. Suzanne was also previously in charge of United Robotics, the European Robotics Association. Brilliant to have you here on the panel with us, Suzanne Bieller.
Thank you very much for having me on the panel. Looking forward to interesting discussions.
Likewise, our next panelist is Chris Mueller, who is the Managing Director at Coal Hill Ventures and the Robotics Hub, Pittsburgh, USA. Muller's experience spans tech development, entrepreneurship, ventures, and portfolio management. Based on his experience, he's developed a repeatable framework for managing complex entrepreneurial efforts, from early development through revenues and business establishment. This framework is a key component of Robotics Hub's collaborative design approach to venture capital and company building. Through this, the company has developed a core speciality in finding and fostering some of the best and boldest advances in the advanced robotics and 4IR revolution, both in Pittsburgh and internationally. A very warm welcome to Chris Mueller.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Our next panelist is Dr. Gary Fedor, the Howard M. Wilkoff Professor of Electrical and Computer Engineering and Faculty Director of the Manufacturing Futures Initiative at Carnegie Mellon University. Dr. Fedor also served as a technical co-lead in the US Advanced Manufacturing Partnership, where he worked with industry, academia, and government to generate recommendations that motivated the launch of Manufacturing USA. He was also the founding president of the Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute, where he served as interim CEO in 2017 and 2020 and is currently on its board of directors. Very much looking forward to your views on the rise of the machines today, Dr. Gary Fedor.
Thank you, Laura, and it's a pleasure to be here and participate in the panel.
Christian Piechnick is our final panelist, who is the CEO and co-founder of Vondelbots, a globally leading no-code robotics company. Christian graduated from TU Dresden with a diploma in computer science and has worked as a researcher and PhD candidate for many international research projects. Christian is also chairman of the advisory board for the Industry 4.0 Excellence Cluster Smart Systems Hub in Dresden. A really fantastic lineup, and very warm welcome as well to Christian Piechnick there.
Thanks, great. Thanks for having me.
Well, we certainly have seen a lot happen, of course, in the last few months with huge disruptions. So I thought we'd actually start off with your different perspectives when it comes to how industries are in fact responding to the growing need of upskilling and reskilling the workforce with the intention, of course, of adopting 4IR technologies. Suzanne, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, the big challenge, we have monitored a lot of discussions about robots killing jobs, robots frightening the workforce, and we see that the solution for that is really the upskilling question. So if we manage to skill our workforce properly, then we don't see any difficulties in that aspect. And we also see that it's not something one party can handle by itself. So it's a multifaceted issue, and we have many players that are developing robots, that are using robots. So it's small companies, large-size companies, and it's governments involved in the whole discussion with educational institutes. We need to get them all on the table. It's a collaborative effort, and we need to work on solving these issues. We see that the need for upskilling is speeding up with the COVID-19 pandemic, because more and more companies are looking into automation, and we see in many countries also a lack of workforce hindering further automation, which will be to their disadvantage at the end.
Have you found the same sort of thing, Chris? What have you witnessed when it comes to how industries are responding, especially after or during COVID-19 as well?
Well, and certainly, and I think, everything Suzanne said was very true before COVID, but COVID's almost kind of pressed the fast forward button on all the timelines. So things that were strong once before or borderline needs are now essential and need to happen in the factor, the time factor of months, not years. And it's to the point where, because of how much bold tech we're able to advance to the marketplace, we're actually creating new categories of jobs, not just new jobs. So when you look at that sort of rapid growth phenomenon, how that back propagates to traditional industry, to workforce development, is one, live action, and two, not that far behind. So we essentially now have to be able to train workers to adequately do jobs that didn't exist 2 years ago. And 2 years from now, we're going to have the same problem, where there's an entire new class of jobs based on more technologies coming out. So, it's one, both really reassuring as a society that we're progressing in areas that are really essential, but everything that, Gary's going to talk about and Suzanne talked about is now borderline top order of crisis in society.
Moving over to Dr. Gary, how do you feel industries are responding then when it comes to upskilling and reskilling? And do you also agree, as I mentioned in the introduction, that some of the jobs lost during the crisis may never return as well? Is that a reality?
Well, I think well, first of all, we're caught in a terrible crisis, of course, around the whole world, and each country is dealing with this and has different levels of severity. But everyone's feeling it, and I think the issue of job loss is real. We're certainly feeling it in the U.S. It's happening more with certainly the small businesses. Lots of layoffs right now. But a lot of this isn't in the robotics and automation areas. This is in a lot of, for example, restaurants, service industries. So I think the place where COVID-19 is really accelerating is a couple places. One is the fact that we will be more socially distanced and remote even if we have a vaccine. In the next year, there's going to be the need for more of those types of social distance and remote activities within industry. We're also finding that we're getting accelerated in our training of how do we work remotely. This is a good example. We probably would have been all together in a panel, but now we're here virtually learning how to do this in the right way. Well, people in manufacturing are doing exactly the same thing, and I think a lot of those skills are going to translate in the future, with industry realizing they need to train people on their soft skills, how to interact, how to deal with technology, both the remote technology, but also things like robotics and automation, which are going to help keep people socially distanced and have higher productivity.
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting point, right? Because especially with workforces being down right now is the logical time to kind of catch up on implementation of tech such as collaborative robotics. But I think what that means is when people reopen, it'll be a different workflow and a different workspace than it is before they close down. And therefore, I think the jobs will be a lot different than when things started to kind of, wind down in March.
Christian, what have you seen then when it comes to industry response in terms of reskilling and upskilling the workforce?
Yeah, so when we look back at the past few months of the COVID crisis, right? So of course, digital technology and automation was a big topic with many companies, and I would like to have a more differentiated view on that, because there are many companies, like the large automotive companies, that use automation, especially robots, for decades. For them, of course, stepping or expanding their degree on automation, of course, increases the resilience when it comes to human workforce and the pandemic shutdown. However, there are also many small and medium-sized enterprises that now at this time finally make the decision to step into automation at the first place. So there are many worlds coming together. And I would like to add one thing, because basically what we work on as a company right from the beginning was a technology that lowers the barrier of entry for programming and using robots, making robots more flexible. And this is actually, in addition to what Susanne and Chris said, is of course we need to train people. Jobs will be lost, even though it doesn't mean that every robot being used or every automated machine being used will replace a worker. On large scale, of course, this will mean that certain jobs might vanish. However, it is not realistic that you will have the same people like now becoming robot programmers, even no matter how hard you train them. But technology can help to lower the barrier of entry and finally enable them, even though they might have a lower skill set, to deal with this kind of machinery and finally be able to program robots and maintain them in a very efficient and easy to use way. And I think technology is a big enabler for many companies out there to finally step into that.
Well, it seems like the pre-COVID world is very similar to the post-COVID world, doesn't it? But it's just COVID-19 has actually accelerated the process, as you mentioned earlier. But we now move on to educational reform and what exactly is needed to align education systems with the needs of the advanced manufacturing sector. So Dr. Gary, as the academic in our group and as the faculty director of the Manufacturing Futures Initiative at your university, maybe you can start us off on this topic. What are your thoughts when it comes to aligning education systems, especially in light of the disruptions associated with the adoption of 4IR technologies?
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, of course, I'm coming primarily from the perspective of the universities, although as we know, in academia, there's a whole palette of organizations that train down with workforce training in community colleges and vocational training centers, for example, which are all, and then of course all the way down to K through 12. This whole pipeline is important for us to engage together in partnering with industry in order to meet the workforce needs. I think it's true around the world. It's definitely true in the U.S. that with the aging workforce, which I think we're going to talk about later, it is creating the pressure along with these new skills that are needed. For us, the reforms really have to do with a focus on curriculum on manufacturing and offering that integrates the fourth industrial revolution type of technologies within our curriculum. We've done a good job in the last 5 years, we meaning academia in general, of embracing the so-called maker movement, which a lot of this is additive manufacturing. But as we all know, the Industry 4.0 is so much more than that for the digitalization. We're starting to work at integrating this into our curriculum. I know some of our partner colleagues down at University of Southern California are working on this as well. They've got a survey going through our Advanced Robotics for Manufacturing Institute for that kind of feedback from industry. So, I think really the main points are we need to start focusing on both the manufacturing technology, integrating it with the digitalization, integrating it with the type of digital soft skills that Christian was talking about, where ironically, because of fourth industrial revolution, we've got a lot of the technologies that people can use robots, they can use advanced manufacturing technology in ways that they might have had to have a PhD or advanced training. Now they don't need that. So, but we still need the right curriculum for this.
So where does educational reform start then?
I think the reform starts with, really at the core, I think the reform starts with partnering of industry and education together, listening to each other about what are the industry needs, what can the academia deliver, and fusing them together both in a traditional setting, but also with work-based training within the companies. Some countries do this better. I think the US is heading more toward that type of model. A lot of this you see in Austria and Germany, for example. It's really this blended training that's very important. And also training our folks, our young people that are coming up through kindergarten through 12th grade, that manufacturing isn't just dull, dirty, and dangerous. It's an exciting career pathway.
I suppose it's the way you sort of you sell it as well. If you say that you're going to be playing with robots at work, then you know it's very exciting, and I suppose it needs a different spin, doesn't it? Yeah.
I think that's actually what we have to make the younger generation clear. That's technology makes working in manufacturing actually a cool job, and we have to look into the skill sets that do not really look at the knowledge the kids acquire, but rather on the facilities, the skills, like being more flexible, being more curious, being more problem solving, and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's what we really have to look for, that in the beginning, it's not about knowing much, but it's having the right tools at hand to develop a lifelong learning attitude.
Well, yeah, and I think one of the things to be reassured about, though, is that lifelong learning in advanced manufacturing is much more possible now than it was, let's say, 70 years ago. I mean, you know, like a lot of Pittsburghers, my grandfather, you know, grew up, his first job was in a steel mill. His job 30 years later was shockingly similar to his job on day one. You look at manufacturing jobs today, the kind of stuff that, you know, Gary's training people for, they're technology jobs, right? There is lifetime learning and there is lifetime progression. And it's a very different story from the dull, dirty, dangerous of the 40s. I think that's a good thing. You know, it's something where, I mean, startups, small businesses, big businesses are now leaning back and partnering with folks like Gary through organizations like ARM. And you're seeing more of that progression and that ecosystem around manufacturing jobs. And I think that's a much, fundamentally, to Susan's point, a more attractive way to work.
Because as you mentioned earlier, Chris, of course, skill sets adapt and change all the time, and at such a rapid pace as well. So what do you think really needs to be done in order to keep up with advanced manufacturing when it comes to education then?
Well, and certainly I think all of us have individually hit on, I mean, this is becoming a team effort, right? We have to move fast, we have to move very soon, and we have to mobilize a much bigger workforce than we have recently. And that's not something that, you know, universities or small businesses or big businesses can solve alone. So we have to do it together. And things like Christian are working on that lowers the barrier and speeds up the learning curve for people trying to get into the field is an essential part of it. But it's, you know, it's kind of a ecosystem now, and it has to be all of us.
And Suzanne, also being a part of the International Federation of Robotics, which acts, as we mentioned earlier, as the voice of the robotics, you know, the global robotics industry as well. What can be done on sort of a global scale when it comes to education? And do you think this is also realistic when it comes to developing countries as well? Are they going to be able to be up to speed like the rest?
What we as IFR see is that some countries do much better than others. So some countries are much better prepared for this transition process than others are. Good examples are, for example, South Korea, Singapore, but also Germany as a good example. We see that it's not all about university education. We see good results, especially in Germany with the vocational training programs, where we have the educational system combined with the companies. So the curricula are developed in collaboration between the companies that do know the needs for their future employers, as well as the educational bodies that develop the training programs. And that's something that's really a success story. And I think this is from a global perspective, we should be happy to learn from those countries that actually already succeeded or do have good examples and best practices. We should sit on a table and exchange those best practices and learn from each other. Should be willing to learn from each other. That's what we need also in this debate.
I suppose it'd be quite interesting to learn from previous industrial revolutions as well, and how they, adapted and things like that as well. And Christian, what are your views when it comes to educational reform? What do you think needs to be done?
I think there are many things were said that are so true. So interdisciplinary jobs or skills basically is one of the key aspects, right? So traditionally manufacturing was a pretty mechanical part, and it became then electrical engineering became a big part of it, and over the, let's say, last 2 decades, computer science and everything related is the big driver for change. So today, as an engineer, and there are 2 worlds, right? The ones developing the technologies for the new technologies, and the one that are supposed to using it, right? And for the ones developing it, I think university education as well as schools have to work much more interdisciplinary. So mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, computer science, all woven together. And then when it comes to school education, even primary school, so I have 2 kids, 9 and 6, right? So I think they have grown with robots. So my son is 9 years old and he can program robots. This kind of combination of digital technology and mechanical and electrical is a big thing for kids, right? And if you integrate it wisely into school education, you can draw attention to engineering right away, because you can use it in many classes. And in 10 years from now, you will get a workforce who just have grown up with the technology, being able to then drive the next wave of new technologies. But this is of utmost importance from my perspective. So us as a company, we're 100 people now after 2 years. Finding the right talent for us is super challenging, because the skill set we are looking for engineers is an extreme mixture between mechanical, electrical, engineering, and computer science. And the ones, however, our technology enables the ones that don't have a university education to be able to flexibly use robots in manufacturing processes with a high quality. But for the people developing the technologies, the skill set and requirements is even higher.
Great to know there's a lot of flexibility though. That's very good to know. And also, as you mentioned about the education side of things and popularizing sort of STEM subjects as well is a very big thing. And I mentioned earlier that my son does coding at school and he's 6. So, and that's just something that would never have existed sort of 20 years ago. So it's just interesting to know, I suppose, what the next 15 years is going to bring in those sorts of subjects as well. Yeah.
Well, but I mean, I think that point though is really kind of interesting, is in terms of the next 15 years, right? Because as much as expert panels like ourselves would like to pontificate about the future, none of us can accurately predict the next 15 years. And if we all wrote down our next 15-year timeline, I guarantee you look at 15 years later, and at least half of it, if not more, would be wrong. So, we are almost having to train people for an increasingly changing landscape that we don't ourselves understand. And, points that Christian made about like flexibility and lowering the barrier entry, I mean, those are really, in my opinion, the essential points, because the days where, a bachelor's degree takes you 30 years are gone. I mean, it's hopeful that your bachelor's degree takes you 5. And this is now a lifelong learning approach across industries. And I think that's a good thing. Looping back to Suzanne's point from earlier, that level of lifetime learning is actually more engaging as a career path, and hopefully makes advanced manufacturing a little stickier. But it's a challenge. It's a different way to think about this. And I think in a good way.
I think the analogy for us always is pretty much always with easy to use operating system. Let's take Windows, right? So back in the 90s or in the early 90s, PCs were mainly used by military and research and was turned into machine every single person on this planet basically can use or uses on a daily basis, right? And this pretty much came with many technology advances, most of all, of course, with an easy-to-use user front end, with solving the problem of heterogeneity. Overall, you had an experience of using a device regardless of your educational background. And I think that's what I've meant in lowering the barrier of entry and in developing technologies. I mean, if you go to a shop floor today, if you look at the user interfaces alone of a standard machine, it looks like it comes straight from the 70s or 80s, right? And there is a larger group of companies now working on ease of use and basically getting access to this kind of advanced technology for people that don't have this extreme training. So with our technology, for example, we had blue-collar workers at Volkswagen being able to train robots to do sealing processes, fully process stable. And this is the kind of technology I'm talking about that will create new jobs, but overall having the same kind of skill set requirements for the people doing the job.
I suppose you almost expect the technology to be so advanced in 20 years' time that what's very complicated now, as you said, is just going to be done with the push of a button in 20 years' time. And yeah, that's how I suppose it all evolves,
well,
isn't it?
I mean, but hopefully it's a combination of two things. One of which is the advancement of technology. The other one is the advancement of kind of more of the user interface, so that technology and humans are kind of more collaborative. And I think one of the essential technology themes over the next 5 to 10 years will be kind of augmented intelligence, where how you build products like Christians are very focused on making humans able to more quickly learn and quickly disseminate action versus, push a button and it's kind of hands-off machine behind the curtain.
Yeah, very interesting. Well, actually, Dr. Gary mentioned the aging workforce and migration as well, which I think we're going to turn our attention to now. What sort of strategies are in place for technology adoption when it comes to these segments in particular? And is it too much of a gradual process for them to adapt to now? Is it maybe a little bit too late? Dr. Gary, what sort of strategies are in place for technology adoption when it comes to these segments?
Well, I'll kick that off with, there's a number of strategies, right? One of them is this embracing of digital soft skills that have just been talked about that make things easier to use, which is able to then pull in the younger generation into the workforce more rapidly, because it's the younger generation that actually has grown up with the digital soft skills. If they're brought forward with the appropriate tools, like the type that Christian works on at Mondelot's, those are the types of skills that will effectively solve the issue of the aging workforce, where we desperately need the large number of people to work in manufacturing. We're just going to have a huge problem in the next decade in finding them, and that's one strategy. I mean, another one on the other end of the spectrum is to extend the working life, if you will, of the aging workers in the in industry. There's a lot of thought of taking, for example, what are so-called baby boomers and their knowledge, and extending them by, they may retire, but then you bring them back as consultants so that they can continue working in your company, both adding that value, but also we need to extend them in order to do more of the kind of transfer of general knowledge onto the new workforce.
Suzanne, how do you feel that tech can support the aging workforce as well, and what strategies are currently in place as well?
Yeah, indeed. The robotics has a lot of technology in place to support the aging workforce. There's a lot of heavy lifting still involved in manufacturing processes where either collaborative robots or exoskeletons can support the workers. It's about, technologies like virtual reality or augmented reality, where you can help the aging workforce that might have difficulties in learning new processes, helping them step by step in fulfilling them, reducing falls, and then also in the end having a better output, and which even supports sustainability in the long run. And as Gary already mentioned, it's important to keep the knowledge in the companies. I think that's especially for the white collar workers, that's very important, to not lose the wisdom we have in the companies. But also the next step is very important when this aging workforce we currently have is going into retirement, and we have many societies, especially Japan and Germany, are good examples for that, where this baby boomer generation is supposed to go into retirement within the next 10 to 15 years. And companies are already considering how to fill this vacancy, because there's not much workforce left that can fill up those spots. So we have to invest into technology to fill those spots. So many companies, big companies, are actually investigating how technology can fill this vacancy. And another good example in that respect is Britain. If you look at Britain and the Brexit effect, they have long focused on incoming workforce from different other European countries, and with the finalization of the Brexit, this migrating workforce is going back to their origins, and so there's a massive lack of active workforce, and companies are suffering from not enough workers. So that's again where we see a big push for automation. So they are filling this vacancy.
Because, but I think one really important part in what you just said, Susan, was the word kind of wisdom, right? Because I mean, classically, you've looked at people on factory lines and in manufacturing. I mean, the number one requirement was to be able to consistently lift 45 pounds. Things of that nature. Smack a sledgehammer, take your pick. But as a result, your wisest employees, which are often your oldest, were retiring because they could no longer do a low-level task that's very, very easy to automate. So, besides this being a problem for the aging workforce, it's a problem for employers, right? Because you're retiring your best, most well-trained people because they could no longer do tasks that, quite frankly, people shouldn't have been doing to begin with.
And we shouldn't neglect the fact that basically what the internet has brought us, besides communication, of course, is having shared global knowledge, right? And I think there are many companies like ours who are currently working on basically mining and capturing this shared knowledge. So we, for example, have a technology where you can show a robot a task by example. Our software analyzes what was your attention in the task and then generates a program which a robot can do alone, and we can share those skills which are learned across robots globally. So we, for example, had one cool use case where Satya Nadella, CEO of Microsoft, trained a robot from Redmond, which was in Germany, doing a PVC sealing application, and this knowledge, of course, can be reused for other robots, even across factory borders. And a second thing is that with such an approach, you can transfer skills which are in the hands and bodies of people, and transfer them directly to robots, which over time will create a massive database and approach how we can actually transfer one directional from human to robot. But there are, like Susan said, there are also technologies like exoskeletons who do the reverse way of transferring basically skills from robots to humans. And this whole aspect of working, living, and manufacturing with technology as a partner, as in real cooperation, and not what we see today, will be an enabler for having an aging society still going to work.
I'd like to build off of that in a kind of another new way, which is not only is technology allowing the robots and automation to fill these needs that Chris and Christian have just talked about, but also the technologies like with industrial Internet of Things and the new 5G technologies and having all of this on the edge is helping to augment the humans in the manufacturing as well, to transfer, just like we're going to transfer knowledge effectively to the robots. Actually, ironically, the technology is also helping us enhance transferring knowledge to the worker in the factory floor. And it can be done, a lot of that can be done either automated or remotely. Automated would be, you know, effectively the idea we talk about at Carnegie Mellon is just-in-time guidance. And a lot of this is, of course, new types of augmented reality, where you're not just going through a user manual, but the AI in the augmented reality understands the situation you're in. It can provide just-in-time guidance of something you're doing wrong, or maybe how to do something more efficiently without bugging you about things that you already know. And then more, I think equally importantly for the aging workforce, it allows us to have more people that can work remotely from the factory and be experts that come in and help people. They're helping them, but they're not actually physically in the factory. So now you can have folks that may be aging, they can sit at home and they're just as effective on the factory floor now.
Well, automation, of course, is undoubtedly going to spur the growth of new jobs and new job categories, of course, as well. Going just back quickly to Christian, how do you think this type of job transformation can positively affect the workforce of the future, especially as there is still a lot of fear and misconceptions when it comes to sort of robots and automation and trust and things like that. So tell us a little bit more about the positive effects to the workforce of the future.
So I think generally speaking, the kind of resources we need and the growing population, of course, also manufacturing is kind of changing. And if I look at this whole huge army, especially in Europe, but I don't think it's so much different in the US, of small and medium-sized enterprises, of course, they have to stay competitive in the global market. So automation, cost effectiveness, and still keeping jobs is one of the major challenges. What I really see and is that if you want to have people or those small medium-sized enterprises and also established players still being competitive in the global market, as enable them to work potentially longer or with an aging society, then technology can help in many aspects. Of course, the older people get, their physical abilities are limited, and the likelihood of like having permanent damages to the body is higher. And what technology really can help is making jobs easier or transforming jobs from less physical work to more mental work, and really using technology to support people. And this is not just a cost driver. So often in this discussion, people think if I assist the people with a robot, then my cost goes up. But having like humans just focusing on real value creating work and assisting the human with the non-value creating work is really one of the key enablers to increase the efficiency of a company in the future in a way that it stays competitive in this global competitive landscape.
Yeah, and for some reason, I think people get much more scared about this sort of assistive, automation in a factory setting. But I don't think that should be the case. I mean, if you look back at, imagine going back to having to spell check your own emails or drive without electronic assist. I don't know about you, but like my electronic assist goes up in my car, I start driving a lot slower. And we're talking about this sort of thing for the workforce, right? It's not this scary thing that should threaten you. You should want to work in an automated workplace. You know, unions, I think in a lot of countries are actually getting wise to this, right? And they're realizing that their workers are going to be paid less, get hurt more, and have a lower job satisfaction without automation than with it. So it's not something to be scared of.
I think that's a good point. The trade unions in some countries are still a bit hesitant about embracing robotics, as they understand the robot as a competitor to the human worker instead of a friend and helper. And I think what we have to do, and IFR is part of ISR's work to actually do that, is to educate people or to convince people that robots are helpers for the humans instead of enemies, and that it should be a pleasure to work with a robot instead of doing the dirty or delicate or dangerous work on myself. So my hope is that the younger generation that grows up with coding in school, that grows up with digital technologies, that know robots are not just banned science fiction films and horrible science fiction movies, but they really have cool robot toys where they can code them themselves, and the robots actually then do what they want them to do. It's not the robots imposing some threats, but we can actually tell the robots what to do, and that will be the same in the future. It's at the end, it's a tool, and we should I think that has to become clear to the workforce of the future. That's a cool tool, but it's just still a tool, and I'm the man. I'm saying what has to happen, and then this will be a successful thing, and then we'll also find the workforce of the future that's still willing to work in the factory and does not prefer a job in banking or some service sector where I think it's better to work with it.
No, and your point on, you know, actually growing up with robot toys and kind of this generational aspect is an intriguing one, right? Because, you know, I know my son's generation and, you know, my generation, I grew up dreaming of having a friendly robot coworker. Like, to me, this is awesome. But there's a certain, I think, you know, technological scariness, you know, let's say post 55, that is a lot more frightening for older generations in the workforce, you know, than, you know, younger generations in the workforce. And as Gary pointed out, it's actually that aging generation that should be most welcoming of this technology, because it's, I think, amongst the best for their long-term health and long-term kind of job security.
I actually went to an autonomous vehicles conference here in Dubai, and they gave a very good example of almost like an autonomous, not an autonomous vehicle, but autonomy, where back in the day when an elevator in the building was first operated by a person, you see, and now it's just normal. You go into the elevator, you press a button, and that's a prime example of, I mean, you can't even imagine someone sitting there anymore. That's sort of cutting the worker out. But yeah, it's just completely not needed, is it?
But to me, I would like to give an example to make it more concrete, especially what Suzanne just said, because it's so important, right? So one of our clients, of course, we work with large companies like automotive tier 1, tier 2 companies, automotive OEMs, but on the low end, for example, one of our clients is a bakery with 17 employees. And basically, as a baker in Germany, it's hard to find people that are following up, right? So you have horrible work times, not so good work conditions. So it's hard to find like students really digging into this job. So what the baker did was buying a machine where you can put in flour, and it forms rolls. But what happens is they just fall out, right? And there were 2 bakers just for 3 hours a day just taking rolls out of this machine and putting it into trays, which wasn't so much of a help. And of course, work was very dull, and they still had to finish the rest of the work. So what they did was actually putting a robot there doing this very dumb job, and then everyone was happy. So the rest of the employees, they could focus on the jobs who are really value creating, where they can bring in their skills, which are really handwork and this stupid job of just standing there. No one wants to do that, right? Taking just rolls out of a machine, putting them to trays. This is done by a robot, and now they have a workplace which where they basically have reduced costs by introducing technology. No one left the bakery, and they are a little bit more future-proof. And there are many of those cases we experience on a daily basis.
Well, and I think what you're saying is probably the rule, not the exception. I mean, you know, you look at actually a great study the London School of Economics did a couple of years ago. You look back at automation all the way to the cotton gin, you know, at no point has an increase in automation, even in the same short-term period, led to a net decrease in jobs or a net decrease in net pay. Increased productivity is kind of one of the core assumptions economically of us rising as a society, and that's exactly what we're talking about. You know, you look at kind of one of the issues here in America about, you know, living wage jobs and sub-living wage jobs. It's not the above living wage jobs that are threatened by automation, right? It's the sub-minimum wage tasks that getting those done more cheaply actually frees up more above living wage jobs.
Sadly, we are running out of time.
The bakery example is a prime example of that.
Sorry, sadly, we are running out of time. Dr. Gary, with your ARM Institute hat on, tell us your final notes on the positives when it comes to the workforce of the future.
Thanks, Laura. Yeah, actually, I would like to tap into the experience we've had in the ARM Institute, especially on this issue about new jobs and new career pathways. And I think one of the big trends and takeaways is it is about the skills, and we talked about the soft skills, digital soft skills, lifelong learning, but also, you know, problem solving skills. Notice all those things don't talk about, gee, you got to learn you got to learn this programming language, or you have to learn about this tool. It's more about the future. I think because of that, you know, we are seeing new jobs starting to arise. We're in a real transition period. And I think one of the big things that challenges we all have, and this goes up to the governments, is you know, working in partnership, is identifying what those career pathways are going to be in different areas of the world, and connecting the companies as they emerge in those career pathways, helping them formalize, identify them so that we can start to cluster, and then also have a mechanism for the students and the workforce, that, you know, the displaced workforce, to learn about those new career pathways. So it's not just about skills, it's about how do I get there, and what are the resources. And I think we have some of that in place. The ARM Institute is working on that in robots with things like robotic integrators, specialists, robotic technician type of jobs. It's got to be done across the board. And to me, that's a very important aspect of this.
Brilliant. It really is going to be fascinating to see what the future workplace might look like, of course. Right, sadly, we have run out of time, but very quickly, if all of you could just give us a quick 1-minute wrap-up of some of the key highlights and takeaways that you feel our audience should go away with today, what would they be? We'll start off with Chris.
Well, I mean, I think the one takeaway is probably, hopefully, very similar amongst all of us, which is, you know, this increase in automation in the workforce is something that is ultimately better for the workforce. It has been consistently for over a century. I think it's very easy to say it will be, you know, this time too. And this is kind of a stepping stone to better jobs, more resilient societies, and a better future. And as a result, you know, we should be happy that our friendly robot co-workers coming, not scared of that.
Dr. Gary, your final thoughts, please.
Well, I've shared most of them, but I think I just second what Chris said, that the most important takeaway from this message is that, you know, that robotics and automation is an area in manufacturing that is helping continue to move manufacturing forward, continuing to keep jobs. But we do have a transition. We have to learn what those career pathways are, and people, you know, especially our young folks, learning those new skills and learning problem solving mechanisms is really what the future holds for them.
Suzanne, your final words, please.
My final thoughts are, well, skilling is the key to solving this, or to enabling a smooth transition to the digital transformation. We cannot handle that alone. It's a collaborative effort. So we have to get the SMEs, the startups, the large-scale end users of robots, as well as the educational institutes and the governments on the same table to discuss, to foresee how the future will look like, what skills are needed, and how we can manage to get them to the students and the workforce of the future. And a second very important point is the lifelong learning issue. We have to really develop a culture where lifelong learning is a privilege and not a burden. And we should all be happy to be able to go into training and not say, oh, I have to go to the next training course, which my employer sent me to. And we should, we have to share the bill of that, because that's not without cost. So we have to somehow also share this part.
Christian, what are the key messages from today for you?
So on the one side, of course, I would also say that lifelong learning and a culture where we consistently kind of keep in the loop and kind of refresh knowledge in people with the latest technology trends. But the most important message is technology. So, for example, robots are not a threat to the human workforce. Actually, they're one of the key enablers, and also for the future, to have a sustainable and long-lasting workplaces, especially in developed countries, to kind of have a reshoring approach, and this requires to train people. New jobs will arise, so I wouldn't be so much surprised if we have in 2 years the job, for example, of a robot trainer instead of a programmer. And I think the good news is that already people, like you see in the score, people from industry, from governmental institutions, from universities, are working jointly on this major theme, and I'm looking rather optimistic into the future.
Brilliant. Well, it's been a true pleasure speaking with you all, and thank you so much for those essential industry insights on the rise of the machines, robotics, and a post-pandemic world. If any of our viewers would like to continue the conversation, please do head on over to our social media, where you can find us at GMI Summit, and please do stay with us for the next session. Thank you very much.